My question today is, why would you want to know how to write great stories? Why would you want to know in advance how to do it, how to make it right? I mean, if you're trying to get somewhere, obtain results, or sell a product or an experience, knowing how to makes sense. If you're just wanting to make art, to create art, whether it's film or literature or theater, why would you want to know in advance how to do it? So I want to talk about art in relation to this framework or worldview that we've been obsessing about in the last few years, especially in social networks and business. I think there's a danger in applying this methodology-oriented, this result-oriented, this 1, 2, 3 steps to get from point A to point B oriented framework machinery, meritocratic machinery in relation to art. I mean, if you're wanting to lose weight or make money, probably it makes more sense. The idea that there's a formula that's gonna work for everybody, I think that's quite dangerous. And specifically if we are talking about art, I'm questioning here, or trying to invite you to question, this idea that there's a way to tell a story. Where did we get that from? Probably Aristotle. Probably it all goes back to old and Greek Aristotle. He found a few patterns in old tragedy. So he wrote this book that you can read as a prescription of how a theater play should be made always. We don't know if that's what Aristotle was after. I don't know what his intentions were. We're talking about a guy who lived thousands of years ago. And it doesn't actually matter, at least for me now, whether his intentions were or were not prescribing, stating how a play should always be like, or how a story should always be built as. The thing is, how did we humans read his ideas through history? And it's not even about his ideas, it's about how we humans have created this knowledge, this common sense about what a story should look like. I've been teaching creative writing, focusing on narrative, on storytelling, on short stories for 12 years now. And of course, I developed tools, strategies, knowledge, and I share those in my workshops with my students. But I always try to keep an exploration kind of spirit, a beginner kind of spirit. A month ago, no, 2 months ago, I offered a creative writing workshop for beginners. After a few years of not doing that, I've been developing my classes for more advanced, quote-unquote advanced students for the last few years. And I don't know why this last summer I went back to offering a beginner's workshop, and it was great, it was beautiful, because it made me realize that when we are talking about art, we are always beginners. I mean, of course we are not, but in a way, I'd say that we should always keep this beginner spirit, because otherwise we turn our creativity into a kind of a serial factory. I mean, I think it's inevitable for you as an artist to develop your taste, your style, your voice, your ways to do it. But maybe this is very personal, I don't know. But I feel that with every project I start, it is almost as if I started my whole artistic career again from zero. I don't like formulas. I mean, I have my tools, I have my little knowledge, and I use them, but I'm always trying to go back to not knowing. And giving this workshop for beginners helped me remember that if we are talking about art and the art of fiction, fiction as an art and not as a survival tool anymore, we need to go there. We need to stop pretending that we know. I mean, if our purpose in life as creators is to bring people to the theater and sell tickets and create bestsellers one after the other, well, sure, we need to apply formulas because it's all about marketing and understanding what audiences want to receive, so you give them what they want. And that's what commercial art is all about. But is that art? That's my question. Is that art? Isn't art about exploring? Isn't art about exploration? Of course, there's the science of storytelling. And storytelling as a science investigates and finds what our ancestral patterns of telling stories are. And there's value in there because it helps us understand how our brains work. Our brains create fiction and stories in order for us to map the world, understand where we are, and feel safe. The question is, when we are making art or consuming art, are we still after safety? Is art about survival and safety? If we are talking about art and we fall into this framework where we try and reduce creativity to tips of how to get it. I mean, coaches trying to teach you how to write your novel in a month, or the three best tips you can get to create a character, for example. If we reduce creativity to those how-tos, I think if we fall into that, it's all about safety. Why would we want to know how to create art if art is one of the few contexts we have in life where we can no longer function in this survival mode? Why would we want to know how to do it if it wasn't about feeling safe? Isn't art all about feeling unsafe? About taking risks? Is there any art if we don't take risks? And again, I'm not talking about not using any tools or methodologies or developing your own ways of doing it, or I like writing in the morning, or I like starting with the names of my characters, or whatever. I'm talking about not turning art and creativity into this school of how-tos. I'm not talking about all schools because I don't know them, but it's quite common that schools offer you how-tos, because what's a school if not that? What's a society if not a fabric of how-tos? The thing is, art is at least for me, I believe art is there for us to drop it all, to drop all the how-tos and investigate, explore. And I believe that the best works of art are the ones that grow out of that exploration spirit. And there are tons of examples. I love in literature those authors that work with memory problems, with narrators that don't quite remember what happened in a story, so they cannot recall the whole thing completely. Borges, Juan Carlos Onetti, Roberto Bolaño work a lot with that, for example. Bolaño, Chilean writer, amazing writer, he, for example, works a lot with drunkenness. There are a few stories of his where the narrator was drunk in the situation he's talking about, so he cannot recall the whole thing, he doesn't remember what happened. There's the first short story I read from Bolaño, it's called Dentist. It's an amazing short story. It's about this guy that arrives to this town in Mexico, and I was in Mexico when I read the story, and he meets this friend, and they go out at night and have a few drinks and meet this young poet, this 16-year-old poet from the suburbs. But they were, and he's an amazing writer, this young guy, and he takes them to his house and gives them his manuscripts to read. So they read this young guy's poetry or short stories, but the narrator was drunk, so he doesn't remember quite well what happened that night. And Bolaño uses that in order to get to poetry. These authors use the lack of memory or drunkenness or narrators that are not the protagonists of their stories, so they don't know quite well what happened. And in that not knowing quite well, they create this blurry or foggy storytelling. And it's not so much about not knowing how to tell a story, but about stepping back from positions in the stories that give you, as an author or narrator, the absolute knowing about what the experience you're talking about is about. And then in film, for example, I always go back to Persona by Ingmar Bergman, 1966, an amazing, beautiful film that is impossible to define what it's exactly about. Susan Sontag, in his beautiful article about the film, about Persona, she said something along the lines of Persona being built in a way that resists being reduced to a story. The film is about these two women. One is an actress that has this experience while acting in theater. She has this crisis and goes to the hospital and doesn't speak anymore. And this nurse, Alma, the actress is Elizabeth Livulman, and the nurse, Bibi Anderson, Alma, the character is called Alma, she takes Elizabeth to a house in the beach. It's a very, let's say, quote-unquote poetic film, not so narrative-oriented, and it kind of feels as if the film suggests that both characters could be read as the same character, as the same woman. But the film doesn't state as a conclusion that, yes, both of them were actually the same woman, two sides of the same person. The film sustains its ambiguity till the last moment, so you as a viewer cannot totally grasp what's going on. And you cannot, as Sontag says, reduce the film to a storyline. And that's for me a great example of how film doesn't have to always be this Christopher Nolan kind of experience where every single element seems to be put strategically in a fabric, in a machinery that seeks to produce a specific effect on the viewer and convey a specific meaning for the viewer to understand only one thing. So it all goes back to allowing the viewer, the reader, the spectator to interpret, to read, to create. I think if we are after knowing how to build stories, it's because we are still trying to communicate ideas and having the viewer or the reader interpret the same thing as we wanted to say, because we are still conceiving that art is communication of ideas. So we want to feel safe with understanding that if we know how to do it, the viewer or the reader will get it, will get what we are trying to say. So in the end, as I talk in my video about how to write complex characters, go watch it. In the end, it's all about control. The science of storytelling is great, and understanding how our brains work is absolutely great. But as artists, we are not constrained or limited to that knowing. We don't have to always tell stories in the same way, because it's not so much about we humans are telling the same old stories. I mean, Antigona by Sophocles is one of the most represented plays in the history of theater. We are still representing Hamlet and the same old stories. And I love Hamlet, and if we still do it, it's because we are probably finding new meanings. That's what a classic can be defined as. A classic can be defined as a work of art that survives time because it's so open that we can still find new meanings in it. That's one way of looking at things, but the other way of looking at things is asking, hey, why are we still remaking the same old Superman number 58 or remake of the remake of the remake? Telling the same old story in the same old way makes us feel safe. Knowing how to tell a story and thinking, oh, I know how to do it, makes us feel safe. The question is art about safety? So I leave you with that question. Are you creating art or consuming art in a safe mode, in a safe way? Why wouldn't you take more risks? Thanks for listening, and if you like the video, please follow and share, and let me leave your comments or questions in the comments so we can go on with the conversation, and see you in the next one.